Look, man, I know I'm really late on this review. I know it's been 2 weeks that it's been out already, but Argent suggested that I review it, and while I usually don't like to review movies, I respect his opinion, and so I decided to follow through on it. Um, the Five Nights at Freddy's movie is pretty good, and we'll get into that later, but I just want to say first, and I've talked about this a lot in the past, but I'm a very big fan of horror and just general spoopy content, whether like folklore, as you guys see with my cryptid videos, or just horror movies. A lot of horror books I actually read. You know, anything of that kind of genre or that feel, that spoopy and horror. That's just kind of my bread and butter when it comes to media. And I've talked about movies in the past, and I've talked about horror movies in the past, and I notice that whenever I make reviews of them, people generally are just not interested. I think the reason is that my primary audience is politics, international relations, social sciences, that doesn't really overlap with the same type of person that's a fan of the horror genre. Now, of course, there's going to be a few people, weirdos like me, but generally, doesn't really seem to overlap. A lot of people that watch my main content videos, my feelings are that they're more sci-fi fantasy, or they would like some kind of historical drama things, and they're not really drawn to horror entertainment, and that's fine. Um, and another problem is I don't think I'm that good at reviewing movies. I'm not good at, I'm not a very good film reviewer. I'm pretty mild when it comes to reviewing films. And you really see this on YouTube because people on YouTube, when they review movies, they're very hyperbolic. They like everything either has to be the greatest thing ever made, the highest kino of the high, or it is complete dog shit. It deserves to be burned and destroyed forever. And it's just very hyperbolic, and that's what draws people in. So every new movie is garbage, right? Every single time it's garbage, right? And that's not who I am. When I watch movies, I tend to just have fun. I like them. Like, I like the horror genre. I like watching shitty slasher sequels. I like watching stupid shot on video movies that I could have made myself. That's just what I like when I want to watch a movie. And so that doesn't really mesh with the way that stuff is reviewed on YouTube. That kind of personality, that kind of interest in film. Um, this kind of like comfiness and liking of the campy elements or the schlocky elements in a lot of stuff, especially in horror. I mean, there's some people that are like that. The Angry Video Game Nerds horror reviews in Monster Madness years ago used to be like that. After he got copyright struck a lot, he's kind of isn't as good at that. But earlier Cinema Snob, he kind of changed the way that he does it now too. That was that kind of vibe too. That vibe just isn't really popular on YouTube reviewing movies. And the other vibe, other than the hyperbolic kind of vibe, is um, people making these really long video essays about how deep a movie is. That's just like it's such like wanking. That's such like pretentious nonsense. These like 2 hour videos about a 90-minute movie and about how it's like anti-capitalist or some shit, or it's just not like what you watch is what you watch. Film is not a very deep medium. And I know that maybe people are going to be screeching at me in the comments, but it's not. It's a pretty easy to consume surface level medium. I mean, especially compared to literature. And ironically, video games. It's just kind of this simplistic thing. What happens in front of the camera is what happens. And film is really expensive and hard to make. You have to work together with dozens and dozens of people, even on like an SOV movie, shot on video horror movies and stuff like that. It's not just one guy and a camera. There's no burzum of horror. Every writer is by themselves. Maybe they're going to get browbeaten by their editor, but, you know, it's really difficult to make films. It takes a lot of people, and it changes. You got to be on top of it. You got to get stuff in the moment. And, a book could be great on the page, but there's just so many things, so many variables that happen when you're making a movie that can just throw it out of whack. It's just really hard to make it. So this idea of these films being really deep is just silly. I was watching this movie. It was pretty shitty, right? Beau is Not Afraid. Well, I thought it was fun enough to watch. It's like 3 hours long. It's the most pretentious movie made by the Hereditary and Midsommar guy. And my wife is just hating it, because she thinks it has some kind of depth. And she asked me, "Oh, what do you think it's about?" And I'm like, "It's about a guy getting chased and running away from people, and there's no depth here. It's what you see is what you see." And that's honestly what I believe with horror films, right? Films in general. It's just what you get on the screen is what you get. And that's how it is. So now, going back to Five Nights at Freddy's, once I've talked about my philosophy on movies and movie reviews, like Argent, I had very little exposure to the series prior to watching this movie. The reason I went to the movie is because there was a lot of people that were giving positive word of mouth that I know personally. And so whenever that happens, I want to watch it. But the real reason before any of that was, as a horror fan and as a monster fan, love Godzilla and stuff like that, I really appreciate practical effects. I adore suits and I adore animatronics. So when I heard that they would actually use animatronics in this movie, I was going to watch it. Didn't matter if it's complete dog shit. I just want to see actual practical effects on the big screen. And they're really outstanding in this movie. And that's, I think, without that, this movie would have been a lot worse. There's no way that they could have made it a quality movie and had the monsters, the animatronic figures be CGI. It would have completely destroyed the tension, and it would have just been like some shitty Sci-Fi Channel movie. It would have been terrible. But thank the Lord that they have good special effects in it. That really made the movie. And talking about Five Nights at Freddy's in general, I'm a millennial. I'm not a Zoomer. So my first exposure to this was that it was some kind of teeny bopper jump scare core game. It was like Slenderman or something, right? And that all these people, all these kids, a lot of them girls that don't even play video games or play like the clickbait video games on their phones. They don't play like video games. They're like watching videos of people doing Let's Plays, and there's jump scares, right? And I noticed that it appeals to like middle schoolers and elementary schoolers, and that's when I was in my 20s, right? So that fan base, that younger audience, and a lot of girls of that age bracket, when they like something that's horror, they really like jump scares. And I don't even know if they really get scared in jump scares. I think it's kind of a performative act of jumping when they do that. And so that's kind of what I thought. And I noticed that recently there's just been this tendency for horror that appeals to that bracket of age, to take something that little kids would like and make it scary. And so recently, when Winnie the Pooh entered the public domain, they made the movie Blood and Honey, with the slasher Winnie the Pooh, and then there's like this Fuzzy Wuzzy thing, which is like this stuffed animal with all these sharp teeth. Um, and it's becoming really big to make stuff scary that a little kid would like. And so that's what I thought Five Nights at Freddy's was. And that type of entertainment, that type of horror, is really appealing to the lowest common denominator. It is for the 10 to 14 age bracket. And it's like the same drive of, the kid that got his first erection sneaking out when he's home alone to grab his younger sister's Barbie dolls and have them hump and think it's funny. That's like the same type of vibe with a lot of these making little kids things actually scary. You know, the Meat Canyon stuff, there's just something about that is much more unnerving than what's on the screen. Um, of having these kids things and making them creepy and uncomfortable. I mean, I guess it's really funny if you're 10 to 14, but at best it's like this immature humor for middle schoolers. But at worst, it comes across as some kind of grooming tactic. But little did I know that these games focused upon the natural fear of liminal space. And that's something that's really big on the horror of the 2010s and 2020s, especially like video, like short films, and a lot of indie horror games like Five Nights at Freddy's itself. It's becoming really big to focus on liminal space, or that is unused public spaces when nobody's there. So think about in your apartment at 4 o'clock at night, right? Um, the hall between the other apartment rooms, or by yourself, a school without any students or anyone else there. If you ever, done any urban exploring as a kid, and went to like more like abandoned buildings, that kind of vibe, the liminal vibe of space, liminal space vibe. And the reason that that's so scary is that when nobody's there, you get this feeling in the back of your mind that somebody's going to be there at any moment. And so it causes this anxiousness where you're in this space which is used by the public and is now abandoned, and especially a space where you don't spend your life in. You just walk through it. You don't sleep there. You don't watch movies there. You don't make dinner there. It's not a lived-in space. It's a space for the public that you spend time in, but it's not lived in. And you expect to only go through it, and you expect a lot of people to be there. And that absence of people, it causes this tension in your mind that we find very scary. And the second thing that Five Nights at Freddy's does really well in its horror is, and that's different from what I was talking about with like the Meat Canyon stuff, or Fuzzy Wuzzy, or the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey thing, of taking a little kid's horror and or a little kid's thing and making it scary. It's taking something that's nostalgic and abandoned. It's like a liminal space for nostalgia. It's an object of childhood which is abandoned and decayed. So Five Nights at Freddy's is really, with those animatronics, it's the same kind of thing that makes dolls scary, right? A doll that nobody's using, an old beat up doll, that use of a childhood thing that's nostalgic and no longer used by children, abandoned. That's very scary to a lot of people. And, after I watched the movie, I started figuring out this has a pretty extensive backstory. And that this is told to the audience pretty cryptically through the video games and tie-in novels. It's not a very child-friendly story. It's actually a very ballsy story, because it focuses on the death of children, a topic which is very taboo across all media, and including horror media. In North America, in the Anglosphere, that's just something you don't talk about. It is only a few horror movies that touch on that, and within horror, it's very seldom it's touched on. But Five Nights at Freddy's, the whole basis of it is dead children, ghost children animating childhood toys. So that's a very ballsy idea. The main focus of the story is a father who goes insane after the death of his own children and kills numerous children as a serial killer. Um, I really admire the series for pulling off a taboo subject and doing so in such a way that it's subtle, ambiguous, and done through cryptic messaging. It really um, doesn't fall into being like some kind of Serbian film thing, right? Of being creepy in the other way, and actually being creepy in terms of the fear that that would invoke, rather than um, the whole grooming aspect thing. It depicts that type of person very indirectly, and in a way, through its subtlety, makes it very scary. So after I watched the movie, that series became very interesting to me, and it makes me feel bad for judging Five Nights at Freddy's based solely on the merchandising, because I would go to the store and I would see 10-year-old kids with Five Nights at Freddy's backpacks, and you know when you're in your 20s, I mean, that just turns you off. Like when you're a teenager, it's probably even worse. It'd turn you off really hard. Um, and another problem with it is that, I'm not that big of a gamer, actually. I've streamed stuff for you guys. But if you notice, I suck ass at stuff. So even though I really like horror, I don't play that many survival horror games. And, that type of horror game, where the character cannot defend themselves, or maybe like a pure survival horror, that's just not something I have that much experience with. The games like Amnesia, and of course Five Nights at Freddy's, Outlast, Clock Tower, Fatal Frame. I tend to find that kind of thing frustrating and boring, and I don't play through the whole thing. It's like kind of ironic that I'm not that much of a gamer. I like the Resident Evil games that I played in the Doom series, but I generally play games pretty sparingly. I talk to a lot of people who play video games, and I can relate to them in conversation, and I like to browse 4chan and talk to others in that type of slang that develops on 4chan. But I'm not an active gamer. It's like I'm Jewish, right? I'm a cultural gamer rather than a practicing gamer, right? It's like a secular Jew. I'm a secular gamer. Um, so while being interesting to me, Five Nights at Freddy's is not something I'm naturally drawn to. But now I'm happy that I'm aware that it does exist. Okay. Returning to the movie, I generally thought it was really good. The general idea of the series being animatronic characters possessed by ghost children is a very an original idea, and it's appealing to me on a fundamental level as a horror fan. Instead of being focused, this movie though, instead of being focused upon the family tragedy of the Afton family, something that took a series of games very cryptically to tell, instead it focuses on this new character, this Mike Schmidt character, and he's not directly related, as far as we know right now, to William Afton. His younger brother was kidnapped by an unknown adult when he was a child. His parents are now deceased, and he had a younger sister, Abby Schmidt, or he currently does, right? Abby Schmidt. And the trauma of this middle brother's kidnapping takes a deep toll on both their psyches. Both of them have different coping mechanisms. I guess not just the kidnapping of the brother, that's the focus of the movie, but also the death of their parents. So Abby's coping mechanism is that she's very withdrawn. She doesn't talk to anybody. She doesn't have any peers that she talks to at school. She's very isolated, and she spends the majority of her time, making little kid drawings, right, with crayons and pencils and that kind of thing. That's what she does with her time. Mike, on the other hand, he copes with it by dream journaling. He's trying to reconstruct a photographic memory through meditation and excessive sleep in order to remember the face of the kidnappers and other details, like important details like the car's license plate. And even though it's so many years later, he has this kind of feeling that if he only knew these details, then he himself could track them down and bring the people who killed his brother, or maybe even find his brother, solve it, bring it to justice. But anyway, through a series of mysterious circumstances, Mike ends up working at a titular haunted Chuck E. Cheese clone. And so over the course of the movie, Mike goes through a hero's journey centering around his role as protector and guardian of his younger sister Abby. And I think that that's a very good part of the movie. And I think it's fitting for the movie and its whole theme of lost children and kidnapped children, that the focus of the movie is a relationship between an older brother and a younger sister, and the older brother trying to protect her. And I think that both of the actors do pretty good with each other in it. So something that a lot of people are disliking are the scenes where the puppets are depicted as friendly, especially with Abby. Again, I'm not that well read on the lore, so I don't know how much it matches the lore. But outside of that, a lot of people just say it kills the pacing and changes the atmosphere of the film. I think it's okay. I think it works. I think that it works because it shifts the audience expectation from these animatronic monsters that are originally the initial villain. It shifts them to understanding that there's a big bad. And so that's kind of important that it does that. So I would actually defend that. Something that really makes this movie good is that by focusing on the kidnapping of the younger brother Garrett and kidnapped children and deceased children in general, it really brings to mind the satanic panic or ritual abuse panic of the 1980s. And that's really helped by the way that the sets in the movie are decorated. And when you watch the movie, you notice that everything is out of date. And it feels like it's in the 80s, or at least like in the 90s. And the way that Five Nights at Freddy's is, the restaurant, Freddy Fazbear's, is illustrated to the audience is that there's urban legends surrounding the disappearances of children connected to that restaurant, and it's unsolved. And so that's a very, that kind of in-universe folklore, or, I guess urban legend or conspiracy theory, connects very well to the whole ritual abuse meta-narrative of the satanic panic of the 80s. And I feel that really adds a great gravity to the film and makes it more unsettling. But ultimately, I suppose it's a horror film that's playing to its audience, and it succeeds in being a light and entertaining viewing for any horror fan. In general, it does well because it has great special effects, pretty good acting, and the movie's pretty well shot. It looks good. It's very clear what's going on. Just general good cinematography. And outside of this is one of those movies, we're seeing this a lot now, where the audience and the critics have super radically different, divergent opinions regarding the quality of the movie. So here, critics hate it, audience loves it. And to be honest, at this point, I think most professional movie critics are just part of an elite clique. And it's really reality denial to say it's otherwise. And to be honest, I think that it's obvious they're review bombing the movie on purpose. And so there's three reasons I think they're doing this. The first is the series creator. I'm going to say his name, Scott Cathron. I'm going to say his name wrong. I probably just did. But he's a practicing Christian and conservative, so got to try and throw him under the bus, make sure he's not successful, right? He got canceled because he gave money to people that were against gay marriage or against transsexuality or something. So his life has to be ruined. He must be destroyed for his opinions, right? The whole cancel culture thing. So we can't let his work be good. We can't let him be successful, right? But the second one, and I think this is really what's really important here, is that the movie draws the viewer's attention to child abuse. Something which our current political climate, the people that are in charge, they really like denying that that's a big threat. The mainstream is really trying to obfuscate or say that if you say child abuse happens, that's really some kind of anti-gay, anti-trans canard. And you saw that with the Sound of Freedom, where people were like, the critics were like jumping over backwards to say that child abuse doesn't exist. It's absurd. And so, in some extent, I think it's connected to the whole controversy surrounding that film earlier this year, The Sound of Freedom. And the third and the final reason is, it is a horror movie. Critics hate them. That's just the way it is. And before I finish this out, I wanted to make a special note about a very good mockbuster of this movie, and that's the film Willy's Wonderland. It came out, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, and that's with Nick Cage as the main character. It's a very similar story. The animatronics look very different, but it again has practical effects, and it's more comedic than this movie. And so that movie's really funny. It's really good to watch. And there was actually two mockbusters that were released before this came out. Willy's Wonderland, which I would recommend, and the Banana Splits movie, which is even earlier than that, which I have not seen yet. And the reason that there's these two mockbusters is that Five Nights at Freddy's has been in development hell for a pretty long time. So over the course of the decade, we already had two movies to cash in on it before it even came out. But again, just like the movie in the movie theater now, I recommend wholly Willy's Wonderland. Great movie. So suggest you go out and see these movies. I thought that Five Nights at Freddy's was a very well made and fun movie. It's a low impact horror movie generally. And that kind of low impact or kid friendly horror, I think it's pretty comfortable. It's pretty comfy. You can watch that a lot. It's pretty rewatchable. It doesn't make you upset like more serious horror will. And it's like, Critters or Goosebumps, Gremlins, Scooby-Doo. I really like the live action Scooby-Doo movie, ironically. It's something which is comfortable. It's a comfort viewing. And so I could see myself rewatching this a bunch. And I'm happy that it showed me the games. Now I'm in deliberation if I should play the games or just try to learn about the lore online. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope you go out and watch the movie. Have a great day.